like to stay longer than been allotted day and watch the fleeting changes of life uneven way. But if my Savior calls me to that sweet home on high, I'll live with him forever in glory by and by. Oh yes, I'll live in glory. Yes, I'll live in glory. Singing now by and by. Oh Lord, by. I want to be of service along this pilgrim way and lead the lost to Jesus as fervently I pray. Day by day I travel, I'll keep him every night. I live with him forever in glory by and by. Oh yes, I live in glory. Yeah, yes, I live in glory. I'm singing by and by. Oh yes, I live in glory. I live in glory. You know I will. Yes, I live in glory. I live in glory. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yes, I live in glory. Yes, I live in glory. I live in glory with my Savior. Well, well, well. I live in glory. I'm singing out by. Oh Lord, by. The end I know is near, repent by faith I look away. Beyond the home, supernal is the land of endless day. I cling to him forever and look beyond the sky and spend the endless ages in glory by and by. So yes, I live in glory. I live in glory. Singing it by and by. Oh yes, I live in glory. I live in glory. You know I did. Singing we're with my Redeemer. There's no more to die. Oh yes, I live in glory. By and oh yes, I live in glory. I live in glory. Yes, I live in glory. Yes, I will. Yes, I live in glory. I'll live in glory. Yes, I live in glory. Some sweet day I'll be over yonder in that by, that by and by. Well, yes, I live in glory. I live in glory. I'm singing out by and by. Oh, yes, I live in glory. I want to be with my Father up in heaven. I want to walk streets that's paved with gold. I want to walk around heaven one day. I want to see my loved ones there. I want to be in the number when the saints go marching in. I live in glory. I live in glory. Don't you want to live? Do you want to live? Want to live in glory? I want to live in glory.
I'm Dr. Richard L. Barclay, Lectureship Director, Southwestern Christian College. And on behalf of Dr. Irvin Simpson, the president of our college, we want to welcome you to the 83rd Annual Lectureship of Southwestern Christian College. We are aware of the fact that the coronavirus has impacted our world, our land, our country, even in our churches in unique kinds of ways, even to the point where the virus has stressed our families. As a result of that, in our lectureship this year, we have invited Dr. Robert and Stella Wilson, who head the marriage ministry at the Renaissance Church of Christ here in Atlanta, Georgia, along with Anthony and Sheri Wilson, who gives leadership to the marriage ministry here at the Stonecrest Church. They bring a great wealth of experience to the task of helping families to understand the stress that has been placed on relationships because parents oftentimes are working from home. Children are now being educated at home. And this is leading to a great deal of stress and struggle in the midst of this virus. We are hopeful that the insightful, experiential information that they bring to this workshop is going to be beneficial to each of you and your families. Sit back, enjoy, and be blessed by this wonderful experience that these wonderful couples will share with us. Be blessed, be safe, be encouraged.
Today's presentation is entitled, Helping Church Families Deal with the Stress in a Time of COVID. The presenters are Dr. Robert and Stella Wilson of the Renaissance Church of Christ in Atlanta, Georgia, where Dr. Orpheus Hayward is minister. Dr. Robert and Stella Wilson have been married for 49 years, and they have been counseling for over 30 years. They have such a wonderful wealth of experience. Our other presenters are Anthony and Sheri Wilson of the Stonecrest Church of Christ in McDonough, Georgia, where Dr. Richard L. Barclay is the senior minister. Anthony and Sheri have been married 36 years, also with over 30 years of counseling. We hope that you truly enjoy today's presentation and that you are encouraged by the words that you will hear.
As we've gathered today, we find ourselves with many storms that are raging on every front. There's social unrest, protests become a daily norm. We have political unrest, we have divisiveness, we have racial discord. And if that weren't enough, we're also dealing with the coronavirus, which is impacting our lives. And with all this in mind, we fully realize that we totally are not in control, and we need help to navigate through these storms.
And when storms come into our lives, sometimes all we can think about is, Lord, when will it be over? We just want them to go away. We just want them to move on. We're out of control. We don't have control. We need to continue on in our way of life is what we're looking to get back to. But we know that sometimes God places situations in our lives that require us to develop patience, faith, and more trust in Him.
What does the Bible say about storms? In the Bible, there are many times that God provided protection for His people from natural storms. While we still seek shelter from physical storms today, we can look to Scripture for encouraging words during symbolic storms of our lives. Times of grief and despair can be represented by storms as moments to endure until the sunny days and happiness happen again. The Bible provides wisdom and guidance to get through the storms of our lives and follow the path through such difficult times. All of us, particularly families, have been forced to transform our normal into the new normal, which really has presented a lot of challenges. The stresses many families had and were dealing with prior to the pandemic have magnified during this quarantine time that we find ourselves. Stresses like storms of money worries, dealing with children, lack of time for self, lack of exercise, conflict over chores, loss of loved ones or friends. These are storms that are raging, which coronavirus has done nothing more than highlighted.
And we know that these scenarios that Robert just gave have forced many families to re-examine how to deal with the stresses in their life associated with not only the virus, but how they interact with each other on a daily basis. And even having a Christian family does not exempt you from the challenges of dealing with the stresses associated with everything that you're going through today.
And remember, life and its challenges, they have a way of squeezing us, and it's squeezing us, and I'm talking about not like trying to make lemonade. Life is difficult. Life will put pressures on it. So the question for us as church family members, how do we deal in a moment such as we find ourselves today? So after spending many months of isolation, we find drastic changes to our normal routines. Basically have impacted, and we find our mental health is being tested. You know, if we're really honest, perhaps we've been counting down the days to when we could socially distance even from our spouse and our children. I mean, the pandemic has definitely presented some unique challenges for us, both physically and emotionally, for couples as well as for families as we are examining. Dr. Fox, a licensed professional counselor and a doctor of behavioral health, noted this. It's hard to believe that in just a few months' time, we've had to rethink our way of living, working, and caring for our families. Such monumental changes are bound to cause anxiety, friction, in any relationship. What we're dealing with is a mental health storm.
And we know that with mental health storms can create the stresses and the anxieties that you face, not only just with you as husband and wife, but with the children, family members, and with your normal associations that you've had with people.
So it's been said that it's not what happens to you that matters, but rather how you respond to the challenge. Within the confines of your family, how have you dealt with the difficulty/storming moments that you have experienced or experiencing right now? It's going to be important for you to understand how to function as we deal with this virus, because the virus is going to be here for a moment. Dr. Nicole, a relationship therapist, once noted, just as we are seeing increase in domestic violence, we're also seeing anxiety, depression, unemployment, loss, and grief. But we're going to also start to witness an increase in directly related to COVID, divorce. Divorce impacts not just the husband and the wife, but it impacts the family itself. So when our relationship with society is affected, our relationship with each other are too.
There is an immediate need for us to storm-proof your family in order that your family doesn't become a casualty statistic because you were unable to navigate the stresses of this time that we see ourselves in. Because it's there, we're all stressed at some point or another.
The question, does your family as a whole glorify God when you find yourselves in a storm? 1 Peter 4:11 says, whoever speaks as one who speaks the oracles of God, whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. The question again, does your family as a whole glorify God when you find yourself in a storm like we find with the coronavirus? One of the things we do know, we have to trust God. Nahum 1:7 says, the Lord is good. He's a refuge in time of trouble. He cares for those who trust him. So when you find yourselves in a storm, do your responses towards each other as a family demonstrate your trust in God or your trust in yourselves? Trusting God in the midst of a storm. We note that families that are built on solid, strong spiritual foundation, they can withstand the turbulent storms that come our way. And it's important that we remain standing strong even in the midst of a pandemic called coronavirus.
And Robert, along those same lines, I think that when the storms come, our roots have to be so deep that it's not going to shake us off of our foundation. But in order to do that, we have to, as families, build that foundation before the storm comes, so that when the storm hits, we are planted, rooted, and grounded.
Excellent. In Psalms 107:28, we find, then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. When life gives you more than you can stand, you know what we need to do? We need to kneel. We need to be in prayer, because it's going to be our prayer life that is going to get us through these difficult times that we find ourselves within these coronavirus that we are experiencing right through here.
And you know, Robert, along that same line, sometimes all you can do is kneel. Sometimes you don't even have the words to pray. Sometimes you have to have the Holy Spirit to direct you in your words and your thoughts and your meditation and in your prayers.
And it's interesting. Prayer is a powerful de-stressing mechanism for our families. If we would only use it more than on Sundays and at mealtime, prayer is powerful. The question is, do you see God's involvement in your storm of dealing with this coronavirus? Or are you trying to work through it yourself as related to being a long ranger, if you would? we know that we need God to help us through the times we find ourselves right through here.
And you know, Robert, along that same line with the Lone Ranger approach, sometimes we think, oh, I got this. I can do this. But when you really get to the nuts and bolts of it, we cannot get through these storms and trials in our lives without the Lord, without God. So that is critical. We need to pray, it's powerful, but we also need to take time to meditate on His Word as a family.
One of the things we do know, we need to find peace and harmony in the midst of all of this coronavirus stress that has been placed upon the family, particularly our Christian families. So live in peace and never become hostile or bitter with each other, regardless of what the circumstances are or the situation. Now, dealing with stress in which we find ourselves today, we should be reminded that we all live in the same house. These are the words spoken by Congressman John Lewis before he passed. The thought is that we are to be united and not divided. Conflict comes, but conflict should never stay. Humility is definitely needed if we're to overcome the stresses of Corona on our families.
Right, and I like that point, Robert, when you say humility, because someone has to be the bigger person when you feel and know that that stress is coming into your home or into your life. It's a time to say, Lord, help me to step back and be the bigger person so that we can move on as a family.
So when families turn away from God, what happens is they start fighting amongst themselves and disrespecting each other. They no longer affirm each other or build each other up. What they do is they choose to tear each other down and devalue each other. That's not what needs to happen when you're dealing with trying to build yourselves up in the midst of a storm. So you got to storm-proof your family. You got to storm-proof it against those things that are going to cause detriment to the family relationship. Your family is requiring you to be committed and be recommitted to God. Be committed and be recommitted to God. So when you're out of balance with God, guess what? It's just going to automatically show up that you're imbalanced in your families.
And Robert, along that line, when you talk about building each other up, so often the things that come into our lives when we are in a storm or when we're stressed, we start pointing fingers at the other. If you would do this, then I would do that. You need this to do this. Instead of pulling together, building each other up, affirming each other, and being more grateful, showing gratitude for what the other does in this storm.
1 Corinthians 13:7 says, love never gives up, never loses faith, it's always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. In helping church families deal with stress associated with Corona, we need to remember this passage of Scripture. And then life storms have the hidden ability to reveal the strength of our true character and our true belief system relative to our heart. Job's character was found to be of pure gold. His faith stood radiant and strong in the clamorous storms. So the question for us, do you really think your storm is so tumultuous that God can't speak? Peace, be still.
We want to thank the Wilsons for doing a great job and giving us an overview of our lesson for today in regards to us helping families stay together during this pandemic season. What Sheri and I want to do now is really hone down into some specifics and give you some ideas of what you can do to help your families and help us get through this storm. So to start our talk off, we start out with a phrase that's really dear to us. That was done it's a quote by Vivian Green. And it's how life is not about waiting for the storm to pass.
It is about learning how to dance in the rain.
So what we want to do today is talk about how we can dance in the rain despite the storm. With the pandemic, we have no idea how long this is going to last, but we want to give you some tools on how we can dance during the storm, and God brings us through the storm, which we know He will.
That's right.
So 3 points we want to make for you in our video presentation. First, we want you to, again, trust God. We're going to talk about trusting in God. Then we're going to give you some examples of how you be creative, how you can find some ways to be creative during this pandemic using technology. And then last, we're going to remind you so dearly that this too shall pass. So those are 3 points there. So again, trusting in God. We want to hit a scripture in regards to Matthew chapter 8, verses 25. And that scripture says, starting in verse 23, then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. In verse 26, he replied, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up and rebuked them, the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm.
I guess what we want to make sure that you understand is this. Don't abandon your ship, because Jesus is on that ship. Jesus is in the boat with you.
Yes. And I can understand Jesus is on the boat. He's the Savior. He's been teaching them, showing them miracles. But even still, while they're in the boat, they saw the outside. They saw the clouds. They saw the storms. They saw the winds. They could feel the boat teetering from side to side.
That's right.
But even though they saw all these physical things, they still forgot for that moment that Jesus was in the boat with them, the Messiah, the one who selected them, who taught them, showed them miracles. So how quickly we can forget, even during this pandemic, that we see the things that are going on in our world, in our country. We can panic and get scared about what's going on, but we have to remember that despite the pandemic, despite what we see in the civil unrest, despite what's going on in Washington, D.C. in the White House, Jesus is on the boat with us. He's going through this with us. We're not alone. He wants us to remain calm. And remember that he's still in our life, and he's still the Lord that's guiding us through this pandemic. He's still with us, and we have to trust in him.
And so many times, especially now during this COVID season, because we're all inside for the most part, and especially in our family dynamics, we tend to get overwhelmed quickly. Like the Wilsons were saying, how we can, we don't know what to do, and we don't know where to turn, and we get all of this anxiety. And then, like Anthony just said, we forget that Christ is in the boat with you. He is in our situation, walking us through this valley, taking us through this season. And even though things are uncertain,
Yes.
we have to make sure that we allow ourselves to trust in God.
That we do. We have to remember, God is still and always has been in control.
Yep.
And I love reading what's called the Serenity Prayer. And the Serenity Prayer goes like this. God, grant me the serenity to change the things I can, accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. So let me go back over that. It says, God, grant me the serenity. Serenity means peace. God, grant me that peace, even though things may be going on around me that are chaotic, that are scary.
And crazy.
But God, give me peace. And also give me an understanding to change the things I can in regards to the pandemic. Lord, I'm going to wash my hands for 20 seconds. I'm going to wear a mask every place I go. I'm going to social distance. I'm going to stay away from people as much as I can. And even though it might be tough sometimes to want to do that, but I have to do that because that's what I can do in regards to what I can change. I can control me. But I also have to remember, I can't control anybody else. I can only control me. So despite what I see, that other people aren't wearing a mask, some people are gathering in large crowds or not social distancing, I can only control me. And I have to accept that I can only control me and I can't change anything that's going on in the White House except by voting. That's what I can do, and I can make that change and difference by voting. But I can't worry about what other people are doing. I can only control me. And then it says, and the wisdom to know the difference. And remember, it's your faith in God that is the difference. That you being a Christian, knowing that God, Jesus is in the boat with us, despite what we see, despite the storms. He is the difference. And with him and that difference in my faith, I can control what I can, accept what I can't control, and have peace even through this rough, turbulent time. I can have peace.
That's right.
Because God is in control.
The other thing that we wanted to make sure that we encouraged you to do during this season of COVID is to get creative.
Yes.
Look, The pandemic does not stand for give up or give in just because we are apart. And I know that especially these last several months, with technology being the way it is, that we kind of can get to a point where we feel, well, I'm tired of being on Zoom. I'm tired of going on Facebook Live or whatever live stream format or platform that you are engaging in. But first, let me remind you of this. Thank God we are living in 2020.
Yes.
Back in 1918, 1919, when we had the Spanish flu pandemic, there was no getting on a computer to see your family or friends. There was no ability to at least be able to worship virtually. We were so much more, we think we're isolated now, but we have so much more of a blessing from God to have this form of technology. So I know that we get this Zoom fatigue. Stop thinking about it that way. Be grateful. Do not take for granted that we have this platform, that we can go online and see our family, our friends. We can worship virtually. So don't ever forget that. Now, this is what we want to talk with you about for a few minutes, about getting creative. Yes. Of course, don't forget, while this weather is nice, get outside with your families. Go on a walk. Have a picnic. Take a hike. You can always do drive-by visits. You know, I know earlier this year, especially during graduation season, when everybody got on board, let's do drive-by graduation parties and drive-by birthdays. Hey, don't let that stop. We can still drive in a car and drive by a senior's home or drive by a fellow member or friend or family member just to say hi, to wave at them, to maybe sit in the car and they're on their porch and you just kind of can have a quick conversation with them. Let's stay connected in that way. That's still thinking outside the box so you don't try to feel so, well, we can't do anything. We have to stay so isolated. Don't think like that. Now, let's keep Zoom fresh. Let's keep Facebook fresh. What about this? I know not too long ago, Anthony and I went and had we didn't go, but through virtual Zoom, we had a dinner with another couple. And let me tell you, I know many of you have probably already done that, but this was our second or third dinner, and we had only set aside an hour. But it felt like 2.5 hours. It actually was 2.5 hours that we and another couple spent laughing and talking. It literally felt as if the cameras melted away and we were just at a restaurant or we were just in a living room connecting and laughing and talking. You can do that with your families. Don't feel like because we're in our homes that we can't be able to talk with each other virtually. So make sure we do that. Also, talent shows and game nights and Netflix movies. We can always connect that way. So think outside the box. I'm sure there are many things not on this slide that many congregations or many of you have already done. Share them with other congregations. We're all in this together. And it just helps so much to help during this time of isolation for us to still be able to connect with each other.
We had a talent show we did on virtual, and we also did even a virtual play. So there are things you can do to get creative to really get people connected.
That's true. Thank you for reminding me.
This, our last point. This too shall pass. Any storm that you've ever been through didn't last forever. Didn't last always.
The sun will come out.
The sun eventually came out. And that teaches us that despite the storms, if we just ride it out, if we just be patient and have faith, that the storm will eventually end. It may not end when we want it to end, but it will eventually end. And just like this storm we're going through with the pandemic, it will end. It's just a matter of time. So we have to be patient and again, trust in God. Jesus even says in Matthew 6:34, he says in his scriptures, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all of these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. And when I read Jesus' statement in Matthew 6:34, it reminds me that we have to take things one day at a time. I can't change yesterday. I don't know what's coming tomorrow, but I can manage today. Because if we even think about, oh my God, how long is this pandemic going to last?
Is it going to go into 2021 or all next year? That can be overwhelming. But if I just look at it, I can just live today, make the best out of today, do what I can today, and know that Jesus is in the boat with me. I can get through today. I can manage today. That's what we're encouraging you to do.
In the meantime, make sure that you and your family recharge every Sunday by attending your virtual worship, or even if you are in a limited in-person worship right now, be sure to attend that every single solitary week. That does so much for your sanity,
Yes.
but even more importantly, for your spiritual well-being and your spiritual health as a family unit. Don't disconnect from your church family. We just talked about many ways to get creative so that you can stay connected.
Yes.
So don't disconnect. Don't isolate yourself from each other, especially from your church family. Don't allow your family to disconnect from each other. So many times, because we're working in one room all day and our children are on virtual classrooms all day, we tend to just stay disconnected from each other. At some point, turn off the technology. Come together as a family unit. Watch a movie, talk, go outside, get some fresh air. Make sure that you don't disconnect each other.
Yes.
And finally,
Don't quit. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1 through 8. There is a time for everything, a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace.
28 times Solomon talks about our lives and that there is a time for everything. But not one time did he say it's a time to give up. Don't give up, family. Stay strong. Stay encouraged. You want to go ahead and do that?
Even though each family member may be impacted differently during this season, we can still encourage one another, work together, and sustain Team Wilson. Or Team Girl last year.
Yeah, just insert it. Team
Yes.
Wilson, Team Smith, Team Gray, Team whoever. Make sure that you keep each other encouraged, you keep each other close, because on the other side of this,
Yes.
we should be closer. We should be stronger as a family unit. We should be having more love and more kindness. We'll make it through it.
We will make it through it because Jesus is in the boat. In closing, helping church families deal with stress associated with coronavirus. During the storm, we have to remind ourselves that we have to prepare ourselves for the storm. And that's called storm-proofing your families. No different than when we storm-proof our homes to make sure that we can prepare ourselves for a storm that might do damage to our house. We want to storm-proof our families because the storms are coming. They're going to hit. So we have to make sure we storm-proof our families, make sure we can weather the storm and not destroy the household, destroy our families. In helping stress associated with coronavirus, keep in mind, we're spending a lot of time together, close quarters in the home. The kids are home all day. They'll be working from home. So we have to remind ourselves about this thing called the tongue. The tongue has no bones, yet it's strong enough to break the heart. So we have to be careful with our words. And James talks about how the tongue is like the rudder. It can guide this big, humongous thing, and it can get out of control if we allow it to. We should always remember to use our tongue to encourage, not to tear down the ones we love. Anger. Being together all this time that we're spending together and frustrating all the things that are around us, we have to really remind ourselves to control our anger and not allow our anger to get to a point where we do destructive stuff in our families. If we're tense, we're getting a point where we're starting to feel an anxiety or we're starting to feel we want to lash out, take a time out. Go take a walk. Separate yourself from the family. And Sheri and I have one thing that we do when things get really rough and stressful in the house. We'll take a time out and watch one of our favorite films that puts us back in perspective, where we let the issue die down a little bit, come back to it, but not let our anger get out of control, where it's caused us to disrupt
And you can do that with your family as well. If things are getting frustrating or a little tense, take a break. Go outside, take a walk, go get some ice cream, watch a fun movie. You can always come back at a later time to deal with that situation. But we just want to always make sure that we're ready to diffuse it so that anger does not overtake us and we use that tongue in a negative way.
Thank you for hanging with us thus far in our presentation. We have one more thing for you. We have a video that I want to show you that's called When Things Get Hard. We really think it's appropriate, it's well-timed regardless of what we're going through today. So watch the video, hang in there and watch it, and we know you'll be blessed. So thank you for listening to our presentation.
This is a terrible time of adversity for the whole world. Anywhere you put your finger on the map, you will find all kinds of trials that people are facing.
You know, life can throw you some curves. And it's not just the things that you see coming, but sometimes it's the things that you didn't see coming that hit you out of nowhere, that set you back in such a way that it seems like you can't get over it. And we, are dealing with a lot of normal times where people feel like already their plate is full. And then all of a sudden out of nowhere, there comes these unexpected things that just make us feel like we're overwhelmed. And you've reached your limit and your bandwidth is full. And you already said, I can't take another thing. And then out of nowhere, here comes something you didn't see coming and you're in it.
This question, am I going to make it, is something that each and every individual is asking themselves all over this nation and in many places of the world. And in your homes, somewhere in your heart, these words are echoing. Am I going to make it? Is my business going to make it through this economic trial? While this nation and this world are caught in a storm, while we're saturated daily in headlines of despair and doom, while we're watching the world that we live in shaken to its knees, do not think for a moment that Christ is not aware. Do not be fooled about the voices of the cynics and skeptics that say, where's your God now? He's not worried about this storm. He's in control of this storm. He's not concerned about the outcome. He's the one who holds tomorrow. He knows exactly what's going to happen in our future. While these winds and these waves of turmoil seem to tear our world apart, we need to understand that God is in control. God is not disconnected from this situation. God is not unconcerned about his children. God is not unaware of what we're going through. God is in total control.
Are you in the desert of your days? Are you going through a great storm? Are you discouraged? Are you weary? Are you frightened? Are you overwhelmed? Our God is a miracle working God. He is going to bring us through this crisis. We are going to be more than conquerors in this crisis. There is a storm, but God Almighty is still on his throne, and everything is going to be all right.
Shake off feeling sorry for yourself. Shake off don't nobody love me talk. Shake off all of that talk of, being a victim. It's time to encourage yourself in the Lord. Stand up to life. Stand up to this challenge and encourage yourself in the Lord. It's bad. We've lost a lot and we don't have a guarantee of anything in the future except God is with us.
We are never alone in our adversity. He's always there. Sometimes you don't feel he's there. Sometimes you wonder, where in the world, God, are you? He's always there. You remember that verse? I will never leave you nor forsake you, period. You cannot walk through one moment of adversity as a child of God without his presence. I will never leave you nor forsake you, period. Not except if what? No. A child of God is always in the company, in the presence of Almighty God through his Son, Jesus Christ, who lives on the inside of us. What an awesome assurance.
When I am lonely, he is the friend that sticketh closer than a brother. When I am sick, he is the great physician. When I am under attack, he is my high tower. He is the shelter in the time of the storm. In the day of battle, he is my fortress, my shield, my buckler. He is Jehovah Shammah, the Lord who is there. In the greatest storm of my life, he is walking toward me on the water in the midnight hour, shouting, "Fear not! It is I. I will never leave you nor forsake you, even to the ends of the earth." That's the kind of God we serve, triumphant in the day of trouble.
I got a crown up in that kingdom, ain't that good news? Ain't that good news? I got a crown up in that kingdom, ain't that good news? Ain't that good news? I wanna lay down this world, shoulder up my cross, gonna take it home to my Jesus, ain't that good news? I got a robe in that kingdom, ain't that good news? Ain't that good news? I got a robe in that kingdom, ain't that good news? Ain't that good news? I wanna lay down this world, shoulder up my cross, gonna take it home to my Jesus, ain't that good news? I got a Savior in that kingdom, ain't that good news? Ain't that good news? I got a Savior in that kingdom, ain't that good news? Ain't that good news? I'm gonna lay down this world, shoulder up my cross, gonna take it home to my Jesus. Ooh, I'm gonna take it home to my Jesus. Ooh, I'm gonna take it home to my Jesus. Ooh, I'm gonna take it home to my Jesus. Ain't that good news?
On behalf of Dr. Simpson and Southwestern Christian College, we want to welcome you to this workshop that we have labeled the Pandemic of Racism and Policing. We all are well aware of the different racial concerns and the racial climate that has simply escalated itself the past few months on top of this coronavirus that is perpetrating not only the United States, but the entirety of the world. We encourage all of you simply to, wear your mask, and do the social distances, wash your hands, and be safe out there. And on top of this virus, there is the ever-present virus of racism and the concern about policing that our lectureship is choosing to address. So on behalf of Dr. Simpson and our lectureship, we invite you, thank you for joining in. We also want to appreciatively applaud our panel. They are made up of distinguished men and women, historians, scholars, preachers, teachers, law enforcement from across our brotherhood and these United States. So we certainly want to thank each of them for their participation in this session. We also want to thank our tech folk who are working behind the scenes to bring you this workshop. And in addition, we want to express our appreciation to our moderators today who will moderate our discussion. We have, first of all, a journalist, Nicole Lee, a retired journalist, Ernest Holsendolph, education specialist, Dr. Joyce Eskridge. They will moderate our session here on today. In addition to Nicole being a journalist, she has an additional career. Hopefully she will share that with you as well. But certainly these are competent people, well respected. I've had privilege to work with each of them, ministered to all three of them, and they are simply great folk. And not to mention our distinguished panelists, in which our moderators will introduce. Again, thank you. And now we turn the program over to our esteemed moderators.
Good morning. I am Joyce Eskridge, and I would just like to welcome again everyone, our panelists today. We appreciate the fact that you have taken the time out to address an issue that we think is critical and that we think is critical and something that as educational professors, ministers, historians, that needs to be addressed. So what we've done today is we have divided our workshop panel discussion into three critical questions. I will start off with what is the impact of racism, and we address that either structurally, mental, physical, spiritual, on the communities of color in these trying times. It will be followed by Ernest Holsendolph, and he's going to talk about what is the role of law enforcement to affect change. And then Nicole will bring up the rear, and she will talk about what is the role of the church to affect change. So again, I appreciate your being with us today. The four panelists that are in my section are Dr. Jefferson Carruthers, Dr. Warren Blakeney, Dr. Edward Robinson, and Mr. Jamil Robinson. So I would like to take a couple of minutes and kind of introduce you. You probably know one another much better than I do, but I've enjoyed reviewing your backgrounds, and I'm glad that you're participating. Our first panelist is Dr. Jefferson R. Carruthers, Jr. Dr. Carruthers is a native of Anaheim, California. He's a graduate of Southwestern Christian College and received his doctorate of ministry from Hood Theological Seminary. Brother Carruthers has been preaching since 1977. He sits on several boards and is an instructor for School of Religious Studies in Little Rock, Arkansas. He was recently accepted as an adjunct instructor at New York Theological Seminary. He's married to Felicia Carruthers and is the proud father of 7 children. Welcome, Dr. Carruthers. Next, we have Dr. Warren Blakeney. Dr. Blakeney has an associate degree and BS degree from Freed-Hardeman College in Henderson, Tennessee. He is a recipient of 2 honorary doctorate degrees, one from Dan Larimore Ministries, Inc., and another from Fellowship Bible Institute of Oklahoma. He is currently the senior minister of the North Peoria Church of Christ in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He has been an avid social justice advocate for several decades. He sits on a host of boards and was formerly a television news anchor. He's married and has 3 children. Welcome, Dr. Blakeney. Next, I have Dr. Edward J. Robinson. Dr. Robinson currently serves as the pulpit minister at the Weston Church of Christ in Terrell, Texas. He teaches Bible and history at Southwestern Christian College in Terrell, Texas. He earned his PhD in African American history from Mississippi State University. He has authored several books of note. He is married to Tony R. Carruthers and has 3 daughters. Welcome. And finally, not last, not least, but our fourth panelist is Brother Jamil Robinson. I see on here J.O., so I don't know if that's what you go by, but Brother Robinson is a native of Mississippi. He has been preaching the gospel at the Williamson Avenue Church of Christ in Jackson, Mississippi since 2007. In addition to serving as the full-time minister, he is also the youth minister. He specializes in youth and adult mentoring, family and marriage development, and organizing faith-based educational programs. He is the CEO and founder of Inspiring Innovation Consultant and Development, LLC. He's married to Demetria Robinson. So welcome all. What I would like to do, again, is just reiterate that you have approximately 3 to 5 minutes to address this question. I'm going to start with Brother Carruthers, then Blakeney, then Robinson, and then Jamil Robinson. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Carruthers.
All right, I'm going to set a setting for this by reading from a passage from 1865, Gospel on Advocate, volume 8, April 17th, 1866, actually. It reads, thusly, and he's talking about the freedmen, unprepared for the responsibility and cares that have suddenly been thrown upon them as helpless children to contend without aid with the difficulties by which they are surrounded, without forethought, experience or care to protect themselves against the traps and the allurements of the sharper. They are melting away as snow beneath the rays of the sun, and without some change must soon disappear from our land. That's an 1866 article or notation by David Lipscomb, who was then the editor of the Gospel Advocate. And although this is written in a religious journal, he mirrors the thoughts of many in the mid-19th century related to African Americans or recently freed, what they call freedmen, coloreds, and Negroes. Many of them believed, because of their experience with this population, that they were indeed feckless children, that they were suddenly cast into an environment that they were ill prepared to deal with. And it was his belief that if there was not some remedy, that African Americans would melt away as snow. I presented to the University of Mississippi in the 80s a lecture on that, as well as Magnolia Bible College, showing that these men would not ordinarily be seen as, and I'm talking about Restoration forefathers, as people who had racist ideology. But the racism and racist ideology becomes a part of this country from the very beginning, historically, in that there had to be some explanation given for the right to subjugate a population or to bring into servitude a population. What happens after that, once one begins to philosophize about that, or even to add it into a theological thought, it increases over the generations, so that it eventually becomes a part of the system in the country in which we live, which is, of course, what many mean by systemic racism. Oftentimes, Blacks are said not to be able to be racist, and it's usually based upon the definition of what systemic racism is. Systemic racism, for many, has to have the backing of executive, legislative, judicial, de jure, de facto, anthropological, sociological understandings of society for it to be an impact in that society. And because African Americans have not been persons who manage those systems, it is said about them that they could not be racist. But what is meant by this systemic racism, of course, is that built into the United States system is an inequity that allows some to progress easily, while others must fight their way through to achieve some level of success in the society. They must work around, beyond, and over what is the system to eventually find success in the society. Now the question becomes, how does that impact the society, whether from a secular perspective or from a religious perspective? And many have addressed what happens, for example, educationally, when you're living in a systemically racist society. What happens in your education experience is that your contributions are discounted. So at the beginning of the 20th century, of course, background began correcting the miseducation of what they call the Negro. This happened not only in the educational sphere, where it was discovered long before the 16th. Historical works were slanted in a direction that included just a few chapters of the transatlantic slave experience, and then a few contributions, and that would be all that was again in history, but also in theology, religion. When it comes to religious thought, many people believe that their religious experience could only be understood from the perspective of Western Eurocentric theology. And of course, in the last 4 decades of the 20th century, there was a push toward a better understanding liberation movement advocates, theological schools such as Howard hermeneutically of how Blacks approach the Bible. So what happens in society is that we understand that there must be an educational system that may run with the usual educational system, but the work must be done. It was done successfully by grandmothers, mothers, and great grandmothers. Otherwise, we would not have had the, where you have young ladies and young men who are going to school dressed neatly, enduring cries and criticisms. They were built with the substance that allowed them to go upstairs and look at signs, enter in their classrooms, take classes in hallways, and still maintain a sense of dignity and pride, even though they were being taunted by the larger society. That takes place educationally, but also socially. We have to make sure that our people understand that our engagement is from a double consciousness of course, and as African Americans. It happens religiously. My experience religiously in Churches of Christ is that I spent from junior high to high school in a Caucasian congregation with only three families. I graduated from a school in Garden Grove, California that had 2 African Americans, 1 African American girl, and myself. I attended David Lipscomb in 1980 when David Lipscomb had just within
Brother Carruthers, I appreciate your input.
Integrated and still in
excuse me.
Some of the background.
Okay, excuse me, Brother Carruthers, you're breaking up. That was that was an issue. So this last part, it seems like your broad width is a little low. So it was a little bit mottled, this last part, but I do appreciate your perspective. And if we can go through and maybe come back, then we'll try doing that. Okay.
Certainly.
Okay. So Dr. Blakeney.
Dr. Blakely needs to unmute himself.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Blakeney, would you unmute yourself?
I did. So would you restate the question for the audience?
I surely will. What is the impact of racism? And you can address that either from a structural or mental, physical, spiritual on the communities of color in these particular time, at this particular time.
When you look at racism in this country, and to give you a background for those who'll be listening in terms of who I am, I worked with and knew Dr. King in the 60s. I marched with him as a child of 9 years old. I got a chance to know Stokely Carmichael and some of the others in the same room with them. And I've looked from the early 60s, from marching and seeing what's happening in America with African Americans. When you look at the law and how we are postured right here in this very moment, you look at laws being changed during the Obama administration, where the prison population is overwhelming. We have 40% of the prison population African Americans, 13% of the population is Black, 40% is jail. Where you would go in and you would have an ounce of crack cocaine, an ounce of powder cocaine. Yours was jail time if you had crack. So New Plantation is the prison, making money off the backs of our people is real. And they make money off of us still to this day. Made money off of us in slavery. When we picked their cotton and did all the other things, they made money off of us then, and they're still making money off of African-American males. Economically, dollar turns over in our community 1 time before it leaves. It turns over in the Asian community 6-7 times before it leaves. It turns over in the white community 4 or 5 times. Every community it turns over, even the Hispanic community, it turns over twice. We have mom and pop shops. We have to take our dollars outside of our community to spend. So racism is very real, very real. You go on your side of town and look at what you have to access for your living, and you find that in your area code or your zone, zip code, you got to go outside of it to provide goods and services for your families. We own no businesses to employ great numbers of people. We're still to this day are asking for the same thing we were asking for 100 years ago. At this point, I was in an unearthing of bodies from the 1921 Civil Rights massacre, the largest one in the country, in Tulsa. I was there the other night, and I told the media, it's unfortunate that very little has changed in reality in terms of racism in 100 years. We're still unearthing the bodies of those folks who were buried 100 years ago, buried in mass graves, burned all the businesses down. Black Wall Street was one of the most productive areas that there was economically in the country. There were more millionaires per capita in Oklahoma, Tulsa, than any place else in the world. Had our own airport, own planes. We owned businesses, 127, 30 businesses burned to the ground, no reparations given. So when you look at the economic picture, we're still struggling, trying to catch up. We're paid less than our white counterparts. So racism, systemic, oh yeah, it's very real. All you gotta do is look around, you can see it in every area that you want to look at.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate your input. Dr. Edward Robinson?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And I
Thank you.
Dr. Carruthers and Dr. Blakeney for what they have shared, and I look forward to hearing from Brother Robinson and others. William Faulkner, a novelist from Mississippi, a white novelist, made a profound observation when he said the past is not dead, it's not even past. That's a quote from William Faulkner. And when you really look at our society today, you see that there are still vestiges of slavery. There are still issues that we're wrestling with because of from the past. In 1857, Roger B. Taney, who was the Supreme Court Chief Justice, said, and he's ruling in the context of the Dred Scott case, he said, the black man or black people have no rights, which the white man is bound to respect. Imagine that coming from the highest court of the land. And that, of course, is still being felt today. That's why Black Lives Matters, in my viewpoint, is a legitimate cause, legitimate phrase, motto, if you will. You know, it's important that we define our terms, you know, moving forward. Beverly Daniel Tatum, in her book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, in other conversations about race, points out or defines racism as, quote, a system of advantage based on race, a system of advantage based on race. And that's so true, you know, that, you know, in the educational system, justice system, in our media, economics, housing, every aspect of American life, you can see traces, if you will, or even see the impact of white racism. Just to kind of, I'll just illustrate it this way. I'm blessed to teach at an HBCU. I'm not at Southwestern Christian College anymore because now I live in Tyler, and I teach at Texas College, HBCU founded by the CME in 1894. And, you know, a lot of our students whom we serve, about 1,000 before the coronavirus, now we're down to like 700. A lot of students came from environments where they were definitely impacted by racism. And when you consider that schools in the inner city do not receive the same funding as schools in the suburbs, you have a serious problem. I'm sure it's not only true, for example, in Texas, but like in South Dallas, you know, where a lot of minorities live compared to the affluent neighborhoods of Frisco, Plano, and others. there is disparity. There's educational disparity. In fact, and how does that impact, our lives today? I just want to give you, this morning I received an email from our Vice President of Academic Affairs. She's a Black woman who's a member of the Church of Christ. And she points out, I'm just going to read a piece of it just to kind of highlight how this stuff is real, and it hits us on a daily basis, okay? Colleagues, as we know, many of our students struggle to stay on track in face-to-face courses. With our rapid transition to online learning, the struggle is even more pronounced. Not every student participated in the online orientation, and many did not receive laptops until midterms. Moreover, students have not been conditioned to check emails regularly, and several experienced password challenges with our email system. Some students lost their internet services due to financial problems at home. To date, 40 students have withdrawn, and another 60 are threatening to leave. And so, she's just alerting. I received this 8:04 this morning, and lo and behold, as we were waiting to start the session here, I got a email from one of my students that says, "Good morning, sir. I saw you had put a quiz, that was last Thursday, quiz 4 on the Jacksonian era, but I can only get connected Saturday and Sunday." That to me is an illustration of the digital divide. It's an example of the educational disparity, economic disparity, which can all be traced back to the practice of chattel enslavement. Then just a few other observations here. One other observation, I'll wrap up and move on so we can move on. When your educational opportunities are restricted, your opportunity to advance economically can also be curtailed. And financial pressures can lead to, drug abuse, crime, violence, emotional and psychological problems. So imagine a man wrestling with all those. He brings those things to his home, to his family, and inflicts harm upon his children, who in turn perpetuate the cycle. And so William Faulkner, I think, was on to something. The past is not dead. It's not even past. We're still struggling. And thank you.
Thank you. Excellent points. Thank you. Next, we have Brother Jamil Robinson.
Thank you, Sister. And I commend all the prestige brethren who have spoke prior to my arrival. I want to touch base on the impact that racism have on our youth. Mm-hmm. And I said it because of me being 39 years old, I can relate to the millenniums, this modern time that we're living in. And in my survey of the experiences that we have had here locally in Little Rock, Arkansas, I could define it as a Iconium experience. When Paul and Barnabas went to Iconium to preach the gospel, the Bible says there were some Jews that did not believe, that stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the brethren. It's sad to say that even in our school system, that we have educators that are not educated on our history as being African American. They utilize the textbook and the information that they have researched based upon their ancestors. And they're teaching our young people and giving them a facade of reality instead of real life experiences. And what you have is, on one hand, kids are being indoctrinated to believe the history of books, but not given an opportunity to really embrace the history of their own people. And so as it relates to the church, it's very important that we, of course, teach them the biblical principles and the things that they need to understand to even survive in this day and time. But the challenge is now racism, of course, it holds no boundaries, meaning that not only is it another race against another race, but what I'm seeing more now than ever is the same race against the same race, where our crime rate has increased, as you know, the public identifies it as black on black crime. And with crime, it holds no color. And so it's very important that our people is taught the reality of destruction. And again, when you look at Acts chapter 14, confusion leads to division, division leads to destruction. So if they're being confused based upon who they are and where they come from, then it's going to cause division, where some is going to believe what's being taught in the classroom, but then you have those kids who are believing what's being taught in the street, and now they're self-destructive. And so I try my best to, for one, be an example to our younger people. I try to educate them, I reach out to them. We're creating some community involvement. We just did a community project a couple of weeks ago where we packaged some school supply items and some sack lunches and delivered them to a couple of schools within the area just to show our presence. But it's really going to take educating our students to help them understand, first of all, who they are, and then secondly, who God created them to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, if anyone has any kind of follow-up thoughts or comments that you want to make at this point, we have enough time to do so. Okay, well, I want to again thank Dr. Jefferson Carruthers, Dr. Blakeney, Dr. Robinson, and Brother Robinson. And I think that this discussion, what is the impact of racism, structural, mental, physical, spiritual, on communities of color in this time, is relevant. This is just one of many. I'm sure we'll continue with discussions, as well as try to really explore resolution and an answer to addressing this. I thank each of you, and I appreciate your participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. May God bless you all.
Thank you so much.
Heaven. God bless.
Good afternoon. My name is Ernest Holsendolph. I am a retired newspaper reporter, having worked as a journalist for some 42 years. Among the things that I covered as a reporter was the relationship between our community and law enforcement. And we have today a person who can speak to that subject in a very particular way. Chief Dale Holmes of Rockdale County is a veteran of the business. Having worked in busy DeKalb County as an assistant chief for some 30 years, he recently shifted to a smaller county, but as the deputy chief in charge of operations there. And Chief Holmes is, he does the important work of the day. He does the assignments, answers questions, keeps track of the troops, and the report to him at day's end. Chief Holmes had a very special kind of preparation. rather than just go to police school, so to speak. He achieved a master's degree in education before launching into the midst of his career, giving a broader experience, preparing him for the urban duties that he has undertaken over the years. Brother Dale and I have been friends for some time at our church, and we have talked in some personal ways about the challenge of being a policeman. And so we look forward to seeing what more he may have to say to us today about the role or the possibility of law enforcement affecting our lives. Chief Holmes, would you tell us a little bit from your experience and training, what bears on this subject? The matter of police activities, of course, sprang to world attention recently with the death of George Floyd, who was murdered in Minneapolis. And that set off a worldwide demonstration about police misconduct. And it was followed, of course, by some other unfortunate circumstances, unfortunate events. But while there have come forward suggestions that maybe the world doesn't need police, maybe the community can police themselves, maybe we should take the police budget and do whatever. But that is a minority view, because we know that our relationship between law enforcement and community protection is very important in the Black community, if none other. And I'd like to have Chief Holmes to talk a little bit about the effect of law enforcement, the effectiveness of it, and in what ways maybe it can be adjusted or improved or adjusted so that it can meet the needs of the community in more ways than in the past. Chief?
Good morning, and thank you. There's a lot that you've asked me to do.
Yes.
And I'll try to do that in the minutes that are allowed. I think you basically asked of reform and what type changes could be made to become more effective in law enforcement.
Yes.
I first would like to say, as a people, as a Black people, African American people, whatever the title, it doesn't affect me. As a people, when we say reform, we have to study, offer solutions to what reform looks like. There's nothing worse to me, which I'm quasi-political figure now, that to hear politicians say, we need reform, to hear our community say, we need reform, and no one knows what it looks like.
Amen.
We need training, yes. I've had over 8,000 hours of training in my 30 years. So I've had training. You mentioned my graduate degree in education. I did that for a reason, because I had so much training in criminal justice. I will segue into what's happening in law enforcement and the things that I have experienced as a Black law enforcement officer, which saddens me every day. And after 33 years, I continue to fight. And as I teach younger, I heard Brother Robinson mention the millennials and below those generations. I teach them to stay in the fight. Brother Blakely spoke of his experiences with a lot of the civil rights icons throughout history. They would like us to stay in the fight. Know what you're fighting, though. We're emotional, we're compassionate, and we won't change. I'm on board with you. Black law enforcement executives are on board with you. But when we speak of the training that law enforcement needs, and primarily the one that comes up mostly now, is implicit bias amongst all law enforcement. We need to be trained and taught what this is. But when we say that, we have to know that as a community, we cannot have that implicit bias when we walk into the room. As a Black law enforcement officer, walking into the room, I feel implicit bias from my own people, not just Caucasians or whatever else nationality they might be. I feel it from my own people. And that's a sick feeling. Going into the question of what's a Black cop does, what can they do in this time of crisis? That part makes it rough for a lot of the younger law enforcement officers coming in Black. The community, I hear the cry. You got to know I hear the cry because I have cried and continue to cry. You know, I got executives who are doing the things from their levels to correct some of this stuff, and the community not receiving. That's saddening for me. If they would just listen to the voices of law enforcement also. Yes, we have to teach these people what we want as a people. Continue to do that. Continue to show your protest. Be mindful of not moving into the area of criminal acts when you protest. But I'm empathetic to that and know that things will happen. George Floyd was killed. Ahmaud Arbery was killed. If Brother Holsendolph were to call me and ask me what I think right after that incident, if you remember, I would always tell you, let me study the case. I'm not going to make a decision just looking at a video, one segment of it. But when I see someone's knee on a neck, and I'll give you an experience that I occurred. You're a Black law enforcement officer in the early 90s, and I worked narcotics half of my career as commanders on down to investigator. We were used to do undercover work. I had a white drug enforcement agency federal agent during a takedown, put his knee on my neck. And we fought that day. So I understand the passion that the family, the citizens, and what George Floyd might have been feeling when that guy killed him. We have officers and law enforcement executives that could show you the way if you were just asked. You cannot turn your back and just say, and I'll go as far as this, and shoot us in the head. They are shooting officers and Black officers in the head for no reasons, when we feel the same systematic racism that you do. We have to start to understand each other and bond. And this is a two-way street. Brother Holsendolph spoke of the things we do in the community, in his community, coffee with a cop, dine with the sheriff, or whatever that might be. But those are sessions that open up to put it on the table. We might leave out crying, but it's on the table. Getting that pink elephant out of the room. And that's funny, it's breast cancer month, pink elephant. But if you have any more specific questions you want me to speak of, I can speak on this all day. But I would like to say, Black can be blue. It can be blue. When we fight the battle for our people, and I point to myself, I'm considered racist because I confront racism. So know that we have people fighting. I want the young people to know I'm never afraid to give a young person my phone number, my cell phone number, to call me if they need me, because we can talk. I have people in college now that I never met, and they're studying to move forward in this arena, and they call me, from California to Texas. I would like to look at, we talked about what is the role of law enforcement in the pandemic. Simply, and I'll try to be brief with this, in any emergency situation, and we're doing that now by having this segment, and thanks to all of the leaders who organized this. If we remember these 4 words, and Nicole is good of taking copious notes. Emergency response, you mitigate, you prepare, you respond, and you recover. A part of our role in the pandemic was to think about how we go about it. What do we do? And it was quick because we've never experienced a pandemic. I wasn't there in 1918. I wasn't there. We receive intelligence or data on the pandemic. We educate our internal personnel, and we educate the community on the do's and the don'ts, the guidelines of what goes with the pandemic. After we educate, we would warn any violators that are violating the rules that have been set in place. Lastly, in the enforcement, we were careful to be more passive and have a more compassionate approach. Amen. That's interesting. That's really the way we should police all the time. Not passive enough to get you killed, but be compassionate in your approach so people will want to understand you. Community Policing 101. What should the community expect from us? In every interview that I do, 95% of the new employees or new law enforcement candidates will start their interview when I ask that question. Be professional. I would let them finish their statements on what they believe a police officer should be. And I would go back to just tell me what professionalism looked like. Because I don't like cliche terms. I want you to understand what professionalism looked like. I asked them, what does protect and serve look like? Protect and serve, law enforcement have to continue to use, and President Obama brought that task force together a few years ago, and they did a review of all of the things that we've been taught over the last 30 years. And they put it in a document, a 21st century policing document. Those are things we already knew, but we were failing to accomplish. We brought it back to our attention. We have to continue to use that philosophy. Being guardians of the community. And I give the analogy, and mothers definitely will know. Law enforcement have to be guardians just like mothers cradle their babies. We have to be compassionate and understanding to them because they're going to cry. But we have to be the guardians, not occupiers of space, not occupiers of territory. We're in a battle every night with crime, but we're not here to remove these people. We're here to correct and rehabilitate the direction that they've taken. Any further on what I've talked about, Brother Holsendolph, because I can speak all day on this, as I say it.
One question that arises in my mind with regard to policing is it's a life and death profession. A policeman has to make a decision in the moment that could cost his life or somebody else's. It's a kind of pivot point in life for that particular person or for the persons involved. So it requires a special kind of person. What can you say about the market and talent to be a policeman in the light of all of the aggravation and tensions over the last 6 or 7 months or the year? Is the charm of being a policeman the same as it was before? Less? Are different kinds of people coming forward to apply to be policemen or police ladies? Is the level of talent for such a tough job part of the problem of maintaining a successful police force?
Yes, it's harder to find good talent. Talent is out there. And in my recruitment pitch to my community, this started years ago. Mothers and fathers have to stop telling the babies that we're the enemy. I understand that because trust has been broken. We have to rebuild that trust some way. But we need those energetic babies to become law enforcement, to protect our own community. We're going to understand our own community. We're going to be able to teach others who are not in our community. We need that. I will start by saying that. Yes, it's hard to recruit talent. The same stringent mechanisms are in place as I went through to get hired for this job are in place now. The deep dive interviews and the psychological evaluations are in place now. What I will say is this is a taxing job on your psyche. It messes with you mentally. And you have to be strong. That goes into the last part of that 4-question preview you gave me. What can the church do? The church can do just what they've done with me throughout the years. Build my faith, know there's hope, and continue to teach me what righteousness looks like. That's what we can do. I did my master's thesis in the educational realm on community policing. I knew that would help. I concentrated on faith-based community in that thesis. And I'm experiencing it now. I don't just want to have these segments right here with the lectureship. I want this to be constant with the ministers, the brotherhood, and everyone in the church continue to take an intricate part in taking our community back. To be frank with you, church leaders have ran away from this right here. When the protests come, we should be protesting now on things that was mentioned earlier. The things that are gonna get us put in jail. And the peonage comes back just like after slavery. They're working us for free. We should be protesting at the Capitol, in the community meetings, on local level government. Churches have to get involved. Who sees more people at one given time than the churches? On Sunday, people are there. We have their ear. Separation of church and state, I don't separate church and state because you can't. You can put that cliche out and put that in legislation all you want. God will be there. He will be there. When you raise your hand to swear in, what are you raising it for? But that's in there, that's in any trial. So understand, churches have to be involved. Had a meeting last week with a group of ministers. And it's a hard thing to take for ministers and the leaders of the church for someone to say, you're not there for me. Open up your doors. I can bring the kids to you. Last thing I would like to touch on, Brother Holsendolph, is mental health. Mental health. I've got a new eye opener to what that is and what causes it as I've taken over the operations of a jail. I never worked in a jail until the last 3 years. And I'll say to you, if you put me in a jail for 10 minutes, my mental and my psyche has been damaged. What about the kids that are there for years and they're in and out of jail? We have to find a way to deal with mental health. A lot of them don't go into the jail with problems. Some do. But when they get in there, they're going to be affected by mental health. Let's get before our legislation. Let's get before our lawmakers, because they've taken all of the help away from the people in dealing with mental health. I have nowhere to take people but to jail when we're arrested. What God has shown us during the COVID, and we talk about bond reform. We talk it as a politician and as a people, but nobody enacted bond reform. God did it for us. I averaged 350 inmates in February and the 3 years previous. The highest number, which was last night, that I have now is 190 people. And it's been all the way down to 120 people in my jail. It was a bond reform that we didn't have any control of because we didn't want to bring too many people into jail and infect too many people with the COVID. So the COVID came for a reason and it's still here for a reason.
And I think it's going to be here for a while, and it looks like it could become even worse, Brother Dale. We have run out of time.
Yes,
but
sir.
I want to say to you that we all recognize the importance and the huge responsibility of all those in your field. And we in particular appreciate you when you have to balance the love of Christ and other responsibilities in and around the church at the same time that you have to deal with felons. We understand that that's a big, big job. God bless you to be successful and to be safe and to be more effective and satisfied with your job. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for providing the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay.
Can everyone hear me? Thank you so much for taking the time for our law enforcement panel with our moderator, Ernest Holsendolph, and our panelist, Police Chief Dale Holmes, as well as the previous panel in which we addressed many very substantive issues. We are rounding the curve. We're getting to the final portion of our panel discussion for today. So if you could bring in all the panelists. And just in the interim, I'll reintroduce myself. I am Nicole Lee. I am a member of the Stonecrest Church of Christ in Georgia, and I'm going to be the moderator for the final section of this panel, which we're really going to get into discussing and kind of critiquing really some substantive measures that the church can take or maybe have already been taking as it pertains to this issue of the pandemic of racism and policing. So let me get right to it and introduce our esteemed panel. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Phyllis Davis, who was born in Detroit, Michigan, to the late Olivia Holt and G.P. Holt, one of our revered and pioneering preachers in the Church of Christ Brotherhood. She has been married to Willie Davis for 52 years, and they are the parents of 3 adult children and 5 grandchildren. Dr. Davis and her husband serve at the Marsalis Avenue Church in Dallas, Texas, where they are active in several ministries. As a member of the Women of All Seasons Bible class, Dr. Davis also co-authored a book and discussion guide titled Letters While You Wait, a little book of encouragement. Dr. Davis graduated from Michigan Christian College and holds a master's degree from Pepperdine University. She continued her education at Texas Women's College and has taught at Trinity Valley College in Terrell for the past 47 years. She has taught history and sociology at Southwestern Christian College. So welcome, Dr. Davis. Also on the panel is Dr. Shane Washunga, a proud graduate of Southwestern Christian College, where he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Biblical Studies. He's the Director of Admissions at Southwestern and is responsible for student recruitment and representing the college in other wide-ranging capacities. Dr. Washunga is also a minister at the Faith Point Church of Christ in Fort Worth, Texas, and previously was a fellow associate minister at the Lake Como Church of Christ. Dr. Mashongo proudly hails from Zimbabwe in Central Africa and came to the U.S. in '89 to attend Southwestern Christian College. Dr. Mashongo has been married to Brene Mashongo for 16 years and is the proud father of 3 wonderful children. Last but not least is Dr. Olu Shabazz, evangelist to the Harlem Church of Christ in New York City, a national evangelist having preached the gospel in 38 states and 3 foreign nations. Dr. Shabazz is widely known as a church builder, sharp administrator, and a biblical exegete. Prior to serving with the Harlem Church, Dr. Shabazz was a minister to the Boulevard Church of Christ in Tennessee, as well as the East Side Church of Christ. Dr. Shabazz holds several academic degrees, which include 2 bachelor degrees, 1 in biblical studies and 1 in Christian education, a master's in theology, and a doctorate in divinity. So thank you, each of you, so much for agreeing to speak on this panel. And what we'd like to do is I'll ask a question, and whoever wants to weigh in, please feel free to do so. It'll be kind of a total of 4 questions, but we really want this to be kind of a free-flowing conversation. So I'll kick it off with the first question. Historically, the Black church was the center of not only worship, but the social center of the Black community. So currently, during this time of unrest in the US, as we're seeing the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement, national controversies involving police, etc., do you believe the church still has a relevant voice to address the pandemic of racism? And if so, what needs to be said?
Thank you so much, Sister Lee. If you don't mind, I'm going to jump in there. It is possible that I might have to depart before we get finished today. But I wanted to jump in on this and to respectfully say, first of all, to Dr. Barclay and to Dr. Seamster, a word of appreciation for inviting me to be a part of this panel. We're appreciative of your moderation in this platform, and I'm certainly honored to serve on this panel along with the other participants. I truly believe that this is a season where a resounding message needs to be sent to the church and to the world at large, that the church not only has a place to address the notion of civil and social and human injustices, but the church really ought to take first place. And I say first place because she needs to go back and revisit a proper and healthy perspective and place of the church in these matters. A cursory look at this would indicate that the church first vie would not be to appear as though we are civil activists experts. What we do bring to the table is a Christological and theological perspective of the notion of human injustices, social injustices, and social injustices. The word of God is so much more than just a salvic message. And when we say salvic, not just in terms of eternal salvation in the hereafter, but how in fact we live quiet and peaceable lives in this world. God intended that the church be the voice that says to the world that God is the voice of equal human rights, equal civil rights, and equal social rights. You know, there's a word that resounds theologically throughout the scriptures, and it's the word nations. Acts chapter 1 and verse 8, the gospel was to be preached to all nations. Matthew 28, 19 and 20, the gospel was to be preached to all nations. Luke chapter 24 and verse 47, it was to be preached to all nations. Acts chapter 17, God took one blood and made all nations. But Sister Lee, the interesting thing is that the word nations comes from the Greek word ethnos, which is the word from which we get our English word ethnic or ethnicity. So the salvic message, the message of how to live peaceably in this life and heaven after a while, was a message to all nations, to all people of all races, of all colors. And so the message of human rights and social rights and civil rights is a message propagated by God. And the church has got to go back and revisit that and understand her perspective. It is a Christological message. It is a theological message that God wants all people treated fairly, all people treated right, of all colors and all nations. And so the response to, does the church have a place? She should not just have a place. She should take first place and lead the battle and call it what it is. It is wrong. It is sin. It is contrary to the will, the way, and the word of Almighty God. And we ought to resound that message.
Anyone else want to hop in?
I'd like to say, first of all, thank you so much, Nicole, for being our moderator. And I'd like to thank the ministers who are on the panel with me. I'm somewhat intimidated by so many preachers, but I hold the age card. So I have the perspective. And so I'm just delighted that you have chosen to listen to the voice of age, which I think is something that our churches historically have done. And I want to respond to that question as to what the church needs to be saying by addressing a question that my young people have asked me so much in class, Mrs. Davis, why doesn't the church do something? And I have to tell them that the church has always been relevant. The churches of Christ, the churches of every denomination have always been involved in civil rights. If you look at the founder of our school, G.P. Bowser, in 1903, 1906, when he had an opportunity to have a lucrative school supported by so-called white Christians, they put him in a nice building and insisted that his students enter through the back door. And he took those students from that church, from that school, and left that very day. That was the church speaking out and saying racism is wrong. We are the church. God has given each one of us an individual voice, and that voice has to be heard as his church. I remember reading some of the writings that Dr. Robinson, I thank him so much, he's such a wonderful historian, and he is going back and he's looking at the path that the old ministers took. And we think they were silent. They simply were not. Brother Jack Evans was one of the most powerful preachers that ever spoke. He never led a so-called civil rights demonstration, but in every sermon I ever heard him preach, he called out racist institutions in our own fellowship by name. He called out their leaders by name. So we have always had a voice, and we have to go back and connect that reality to our young people, that we have never been silent. Your grandfather, a member of the church as a Christian, spoke out against racism when he raised a family in the midst of racism and discrimination, to be decent, human, loving people, Christians. So we need to demythicize the fact or the jargon and the language that says we have done nothing. I support my young preachers who, a lot of them I've taught, so many of them on this panel, that I'm the mother pride today as I listen to them. And I support what they're doing. We're doing it in a different way now than G.P. Bowser had to do it in 1906, 1903, 1909. We're doing it a different way than the way the pioneer preachers had to do it. But God has given us this opportunity, and we have to stand out. And so what should the church be saying? It should be saying what Jesus said. Everything we do has to fall under the umbrella of what his purpose for our lives is. And that is to glorify him and to make disciples, and to take care of one another. And we can speak then as boldly and as radically as Jesus did. Number one, he spoke truth. So we've got to speak truth. And that means that's the truth that says that white, racist, premise ideas are the background of this country. They have historical roots. We can speak that, that's the truth. We have to tell the truth about our cultural involvement in this country, about the racial involvement of our people in this country. You assume young people know the truth about our fellowship, about our culture, about our experience. They don't. You talk to them and they think that George Washington, Carver, and George Jefferson are all the same person. They don't know the difference. So we've got to go back and start from square one. So we've got to speak the message of Jesus. We've got to speak the language that the forefathers spoke. We've got to speak from our own experience and the experience of our ancestors and our family members. We are writing the history that we will be reading about sometime. And so we've got to instill a passion in them, first of all. And this is one of the things the church can do. Educate our young people. Give them the story. Help them to speak out with truth, knowing that the truth is linked to freedom. You shall know the truth and it shall set you free. So I think our voice has been heard, but it has to be heard even more. It has to be heard by more people. And we have to speak it knowing that I am the church And we talked about the corporate body, of course. We have a personal responsibility to speak.
I'm one of those proud students that sat at the feet of Dr. Davis.
Oh, wonderful.
It's always a great honor just to hear her speak. So thank you for your voice of experience. I'd like to say that the Black church remains the only institution in the Black community that still allows for the proud tradition of a people living on intimate terms with pain and suffering to lift every voice. The Black church also teaches the Black community to develop critical intelligence as part of that voice. How? By demonstrating what it means to work out your own salvation, by teaching us to die daily, giving up our certain dogmatic presuppositions, our assumptions, our own judgments, so that we can come to terms with our own weaknesses, our blind spots, and our viewpoints. By so doing, in the Black church, we learn that we can be reborn, rejuvenated, and reformed. I heard Chief Holmes speak of providing hope, and the Black church continues to provide our community with hope, a hope that is linked to the militaristic response of love as a weapon to the responding to the evil that we face daily. But it is a love that is deeply rooted and anchored and produced by the love of Jesus. Why does the Black church do this and need to continue to do this? Because we bear the responsibility to bequeath this legacy of love to future generations as a response to hate and offer the world an alternative view. Returning evil for evil is not the response. One day when asked, how deep was your love? We can show the quality of our struggle and say that we left this world a better place than when we found it. There's no other medium in this country that allows that for us as a people. Just think about that for a second. So it is true, we do need a place where we can go back to that prophetic tradition of Amos, Malachi, John the Baptist, of Jesus. Speak truth, not just to power, but speak truth about power. Bequeath this love as a response to the evil that we as a people are so intimately engaged in. So yes, the church becomes a communal response to this existential and political situation that we face today. And to answer your question, yes, the church still has a relevant place.
So all of you have really spoken eloquently and laid the groundwork for not only does church have a place, the church should be the first place, as Dr. Shabazz said. So is there a disconnect in terms of, as Dr. Davis was kind of alluding to, is there a disconnect between making sure that that communication, making sure that understanding is felt by congregants, is felt by the youth, or do you not feel there's a disconnect? Because I'm really trying to get at, if the church is to be first place, then what communication needs to happen for those who are out, foot soldiers in the community? What communication needs to take place so that they take ownership and understand that the church should be the first place in terms of speaking to this pandemic of racism?
So here I go again, Sister Lee jumping in first. I think that that Dr. Davis has hit a real catalyst on the head, and that is education. You know what? Information is power. And I'm not altogether convinced that the subsequent generations after my time, after Dr. Davis' time, is intimately in touch with what our true history has been. And so education then becomes a powerful tool. Often perception is not a respecter of truth. And perhaps the perception is that the Lord's church has not had an active and viable role, a voice in speaking to human, social, and civil injustices, when in reality, that has been the furthest thing from the truth. Should we forget that Brother Fred Gray was attorney to Dr. Martin Luther King? Should we forget men like Franklin Florence I, who was an individual who radically turned around Rochester, New York? Should we forget men like Dr. R.C. Wells, who was tremendously active, involved in matters of, and then the list goes on and on and on and on. And so I do think that there needs to be a reconnecting and a greater familiarity of our history. And then last of all, and I'll turn this over to the other panelists, would we be careful? Would we be clear to convey that as we educate ourselves, that this is not about merely the recent events and tragic deaths of the last 7 years. This is a 400-year continuum, is what it is. And much of the traumatization, much of the frustration and anger and so forth that's being seen among people of color and non-color is the catalyst of hundreds of years of a continuum. The only change, Sister Lee, if I were to point one out, is that it is now in our time being video recorded. And the word about these atrocities hit the world within a matter of moments. But these events have been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. I'm going to keep saying it. Education, education, education.
And I want to say too that we can't be afraid of what I think it was Alicia Sante was writing as Arthur Smith, what he talked about. He talked about the rhetoric of Black Revolution. In your first question, you mentioned this term, Black Lives Matter, which has turned the world upside down. You know, traditionally and historically, we've had to have those slogans that would wake you up and make you pay attention to what we've known. We know that. We've known it for hundreds of years. Burn, baby, burn. Power to the people. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. It got the attention. And that's what this slogan is doing. It's making you stand up and say, how can you say that? And it's interesting, I saw a billboard where they had a dog that had been abused. And it wanted you to know animals matter. And then I saw some pink ribbons that wanted you to know people who experience cancer, their lives matter. And then we wore red ribbons in honor of women who had been, and men too, had been violated domestically, because those lives matter. The lives of children matter. I spent many years working in child welfare. The lives of children matter. And I could get an award for a poster that says dogs matter. But when you say Black Lives Matter, it shakes up this whole world. They cannot accept the fact that my children's lives and my lives matter. So I think the church has to be comfortable with the rhetoric, but you have to be careful too. Sometimes the diversity technique is to keep you talking about whether or not Black Lives Matter is an appropriate concept and an appropriate slogan, and keeps you away from what it is that you ought to be doing. So I think we have to be comfortable with the rhetoric. I think we also have to look at the fact that sometimes the enemy or the oppressor is going to throw something in there to get you to argue with each other so that business can continue as usual. So I think that has to be one of the steps there, and that is to recognize that there are some techniques being used to take us away from what's really going on. And then I think another thing in terms of the church and segregation, we got to stop hiding behind the unity rallies, brotherhood rallies, and let's swap pulpits, and that's wonderful. But in addition to that, we've got to be a little bit more forceful. I love the singing and the hugging and the raising of hands, and the Black and whites get together. Then I go back to my little cubby hole and I do the same thing that I've always been doing. So if we're going to participate in that, the next time that we are asked to participate in it, can somebody please say, can we address racial injustice? We gather in a unity conference. Can we talk about mass incarceration of minority young men and women? Can we be more specific about what we're here to do? I'm in the fourth quarter. I really don't have any more time to waste. So I want to be intentional about how I speak out and how I spend these last years and months doing what I think God has purposed me to do. I think we're going to have to look at the segregation and the things that we've done thinking it's going to solve it, and say, were they surface? They were good things, yes, but does it take us away from what we really need to be talking about?
I would add that both Dr. Shabazz and Dr. Davis bring up wonderful points. I would only say this, that the challenge to what both of them have said is that the church versus society is challenged by the availability of its members. And what I mean is there's never a moment on the social platform where there's never an image, a discussion that touches on race. So never for a fleeting second are we excused from something that reminds us that we are Black and that puts us in our position. The church really just meets for about 2 to 3 hours on average a week. And you are having to undo 244 years of being told you're less than, you're not good enough. And 2-3 hours a week is just not good enough. So time becomes of value. And we need to continue to repeat this constantly and stay on task so that we can continue to teach our children to make a cultural commitment to themselves by understanding who they are.
So then what did Dr. Michelle, what does that look like as you talked about maybe not having necessarily the time during the worship space? Does that mean there has to be some intentionality about having other workshops, maybe partnering with other community groups? What does that look like when you say that there needs to be, all of you really have said, education and intentionality? What does that look like?
So from where I sit, I would jump immediately to institutions like Southwestern Christian College, our proud HBCU, the only one that we have in support among the churches of Christ, where students come and they sit at the feet of great teachers, professors like Dr. Davis, Dr. Irvin Seamster, our president, where they go through rigorous learning to assume the courage it takes to think critically and become a global change agent. You have them for 5 days a week, 8 to 5. And so that's one avenue that gives our children the opportunity to learn in a situation where they are valued, they're appreciated, they're esteemed, and they're held in high regard.
Great thoughts. Just moving on to another question. As you all know, there's been a rich history and great tradition of preachers and faith leaders who have led civil and human rights movements. And I'm just using an example of Reverend William Barber II, who has really been very intentional about talking about a moral movement, are the words that he uses, to impact the highest reaches of government. So moving from the grassroots to impacting highest reaches of government and society through a moral movement. If you agree with this perspective, how should a moral movement be designed and or executed to address inequality in this country?
The moral movement has to begin with us individually. And I'm thinking about 2 Chronicles 7:14. God calls on his people to humble themselves. You see, what I want to see happen at the Unity Rally, I want the other side to repent and confess of what they've done. But I have no control over their repentance. But a moral movement has to begin with me. I have to have God look inside of me and show me where I have failed him as it relates to what needs to be done. And so I think it's going to have to begin with him, with what he says, humbling yourself, admitting that there have been mistakes made on every side by every individual here. Lord, show me what mine are. And then show me, you promised that you would direct my steps, what it is that I need to be, what it is that I need to be about, and how it needs to be implemented. The moral movement has to make us do what we say we believe. We believe in prayer. You don't believe in marching, then why aren't you somewhere praying? The moral belief has to take us to our own examination of our own hearts. And I think that is so, so important. So I think a moral movement begins with us humbling ourselves before God and letting him direct us as to how it is we need to be involved in this. And then going where Jesus went with his ministry. He went everywhere with it, to the streets, to people that were despised and rejected. And it's got to take us out of our comfort zone. That's what the moral movement for me individually is going to have to be.
Any other thoughts in terms of, is that the right perspective in terms of using those terms of a moral movement, and what does that look like?
Yeah, Sister Lee, let me go back and reiterate something I said, and I'm going to use different verbiage this time. I use these fancy words like Christological and theological, but let me use this, go back to simple terms. I do not believe that man is smart enough to come up with a problem to which God does not have the answer. And so this really is about the core grassroots of the cross of Calvary message. Reverend Barber called it moral movement. What he is referencing is a spiritual foundation, and that is the problem is sin. The problem is sin. And I'm mindful of the fact that there are many individuals that do not have theological or spiritual views. But Paul says, what if some should not believe? Should it make the truth of God of none effect? God forbid. Let God be true and every man a liar. So this goes back to the core gospel message. It is the answer to systemic racism. It is the answer to human, social, and civil injustices. I just do not believe that man is intelligent or smart enough to come up with a problem to which God does not have the answer. And I don't think that it's really difficult and complex in terms of conception. Perhaps it is in terms of execution. And that is, how do we approach getting the moral message out? But again, I'm a Christian. I'm not a civil activist, nor do I feel inclined to approach this from the standpoint of a civil activist. I believe that all answers are contained in the Christological message of the Messiah, of the Christ. They are the answer, whether it is to solving disunity or racial healing. And by the way, let me say to you before you get to this question, I don't believe that we can achieve racial reconciliation. And I don't believe that we can achieve racial reconciliation because it's a virtual impossibility to bring something back together that was never together to begin with.
Well,
how do you unify something that does not have a history of being unified? I think it's more about racial healing than it is about the notion of reconciliation. And I think the healing, for two different reasons and from two different perspectives, has to take place on both sides or all sides of the fence.
that's good. I mean, now I even want to get into deeper. We're talking about it's more so needs to be a racial healing. So, what does that look like? I understand that it's definitely something that is necessary, but how do we even approach it? It seems big, and maybe it's not as big as I'm thinking. What does that mean when we're saying racial healing? And anybody can jump in on that.
I'm inclined to agree with Dr. Shabazz saying that I don't think it's possible to reach racial reconciliation. I'm thinking of the passage, maybe the way I'm viewing it might be incorrect, but it's just my own take on it, where Jesus is talking about the parable about the wheat and the tares. That reminds me of just two different people coming from two different perspectives. We come from a tradition where we were ostracized, we were marginalized. And you expect us to be in relationship with someone else who does not have that viewpoint, does not share that viewpoint. It's quite hard for them to see things the way we do. Just recently, a couple of weeks ago, we were in a mixed congregation where the pastor was sharing with me that they tried to bring up a class where they could teach the predominantly white members race matters. And the response was, you're trying to make us feel guilty for things that we had nothing to do with. And I don't think it's our responsibility. And I'm probably going to say, it might sound a little harsh, but I don't think it's our responsibility to teach the other side what they ought to do regarding race matters. But it's time for the other side to decide what they need to do regarding their privilege.
And I do think when you're talking about healing, and thank you, Dr. Bass, for bringing that to our attention. I even recently, within recent years, when some of our racist institutions in terms of our Church of Christ universities have made a formal apology that they did wrong to begin the heal. At least they acknowledge the sin. That's a starting point. That's not the answer. I think Abilene Christian University did something like Oklahoma Christian University just recently gave an apology for the way students were treated and acknowledged that it was sinful and that it was wrong. And I think that's a good place to start. That's not a healing completely, but healing begins with the acknowledgement that there has been a wound. And that's where it has to start. Now, the next step, I don't know, but then we have to take people at face value. I can't be the judge of your heart if you're the president of Abilene Christian University. I can't say you don't mean it. So we've got to be humble enough that when we demand something, and when it comes a step toward what we have asked for, to acknowledge that And I think I agree that the healing is going to have to occur on both sides.
I wonder, Dr. Davis, if when you say I can't be the judge of your heart, if there's a part of you that just doesn't take that full confession at face value.
It is. That's because of the history of racism, institutional and systemic in this culture. And so we have been, part of our survival as a people is to be cautious and to think through everything that we hear and not take it at face value.
So my critique, so I would say that my critique and pushback against Black Lives Movement is the need for endorsement from them, whomever them is. I think we should value our own selves and tell ourselves that our lives matter. And whether reconciliation happens or not, but we are the help we've been looking for. We can help ourselves. We are the cradle of civilization.
Sister Lee, if you don't mind, I'd like to add that I certainly am not antithetical to the notion of Black Lives Matter. But what I would like to say with passion to the young people of subsequent generations is that we cannot invest 100% of our energy in the manifestation of disdain, detest, the realization about our trauma. But at the end of the day, what is the ask for change? I think that there has to be a national unifying of, after the heightening of awareness, what then are we asking for? And then I'm probably like all of the panelists here, I'm a little tired in being a part of efforts that identify the problem, because we are all intimately familiar with the problem. What are the answers? So I think that to begin to formulate and shape is to be clear about what we're asking. I think it's wonderful that America is observing her First Amendment rights to manifest her disdain for what's going on. But when we're finished doing that, what are we asking for as we start the road to repair and to change, and what are the subsequent answers? The last thing I'd like to say in regard to this is an earnest plea to all of the younger generations to understand that change never takes place in one felt swoop. I mean, go back and look at history. Beginning the formulation of the 14th Amendment that gave Afro-Americans the right to vote was met by the 15th Amendment, which gave us the right to, the 14th Amendment to be citizens, the 15th Amendment to vote. But immediately after that, the subsequent 4 or 5 years, the Black codes were implemented in North Carolina, South Carolina, and other places, which engaged in Afro-Americans right prior to an election being evicted from rental homes, losing their jobs, etc., which were all covert tactics to thwart the notion that they've now been extended the right to vote. The Nat Turner Rebellion prior to the 14th and 15th Amendment, which precipitated leading into the Civil War and the results of it. I guess my point is, when you go back and look analytically at history, it's been very slow, methodical, sometimes unacceptable rate of change. Yet my point is, the change never takes place with 10 or 15 or 20 marches, or the coming together with 1 or 2 slogans. And Dr. Davis hit the nail on the head. Black Lives Matters. Listen, man, we've got 100 slogans. You know, you're talking to a fellow Detroit baby, born and reared in Pontiac, Michigan. I was there in the riots of 67, 68, during the time of busing and desegregation in Detroit and Pontiac. I was there, and it's a slow. And so I'm saying our young people have to learn some patience. Once we structure, organize. Let me tell you something, one change in the White House is not going to change this.
Amen.
You know, it may be one step in the right direction, but this is going to be while I'm here, then I'll get out of everybody else's way. What are the answers then to achieve change? I think we've got to strategically engage in some collaborations between the church and the police community. As we speak, I'm trying to formalize such a platform here in New York City, New York, where we come together with our local precincts to bring some familiarity of faces. We're getting ready to ask that the police officers that walk the beats go back to old time policing, where you get to know Big Mama and you get to know, the guy that's been slinging drugs, and you get to know their families and the people that are in them. Get back to the days where we do have chaplaincy ministries conjoined to the police department in about 1994, 1997. I served as a chaplain on the Pontiac Police Department, got in the cars, rode with the police officers 2 days a week, went out on the domestic violence calls, sometimes whether they were religious believing people or not, just to see a spiritual presence on site seemed to have brought a comfort to both the police and to the other individuals that were being responded to in a domestic violence and other calls. So I think there has to be some collaborations between the church with a healthy a view of her perspective and place in this, collaborating with the police and other civil magistrates to come together to determine what we can unitely do to bring some healing. Something I regret is that I dropped the mentoring ministries of the Harlem Church of Christ. For many years, we had mentorship where we had young Afro-American young men who were assigned Black role models, who were a part of their lives on a consistent basis, and not just in terms of exposing the Church of Christ to them, but also matters of morality, ethics, protocols of life, things that our generations were taught about, but they seem to have began to lose sight of. So I think we need some of those Black mentorships. I think we need some of these police officers to do some Black mentoring and give many of our communities a different perspective, and the fact that not everybody in blue is evil. My enemy doesn't come in color. It comes in character.
Thank you for saying that, Dr. Shabazz. And I want to end with what I have to say, and this will probably get me in more trouble than anything that I've said. I appreciate the stance of some of our younger leaders. It does not water down your Christianity or your doctrine or your belief in the one church to stand behind and with people who share the truth about what's going on in this society. And so we're going to have to stop thinking that we cannot share a platform with anybody that does not believe what we believe about the Bible. We are the salt. We are the light of the world. And so if I think I can't share a roster with you because you are not of the same religious belief, we can't, they're not coming to your building to hear a gospel meeting. So you're gonna have to go out like Jesus did. That means you're gonna have to lock arms with truth is truth, no matter where it comes from. And those people who have the message that comes from the word of God, even though they don't agree and look like us, we're gonna have to be able to learn from other people. And we're going to have to be able to partner with them, not to the degree where anything that we really believe religiously is denegated or disregarded. But we're going to have to lock arms with those who know more than we know about how to do certain things. And I think that's important. And I want you to hear the voice of a young person, young people. Every single semester in my African American history class, we have to write original poetry. We're one of the few schools that requires they have to produce a class poem. And I want to read just a little bit of it because it addresses exactly what we're talking to. And this is the way it starts. It says, does anybody see? Does anybody care? Does anybody know I'm living in despair? Does anybody love me? Would they shed a tear? Would anybody miss me if I were not here? And then they say, you showed me the heroes that look just like me. Barack, Harriet, Malcolm, King, and Ali. But the world didn't see them any better than me. They still saw color, culture, and not equality. I trusted my fate to deceitful, wicked men. But then something happened deep down within. I saw myself in God's eyes, skin kissed by the sun. He gave me his peace. I don't need to run. Does anybody care? Does anybody see? That's the wrong question from one who would be free. I know that I matter. I care, I see that change will come only from his power in me. that change will come only from his power in me. That's the voice of Young Americans.
That's a powerful statement, and I'm thankful for both of these voices of experience, and I just support the notion of unity versus uniformity. That there are multiple ways to tackle this issue. The road is long, but we cannot approach it doing the same thing, the same way, at the same time. But we must have a unified cause. My body has organs, and my organs function in unity to keep the body alive. My eyes are not my ears are not my feet are not my hands, but they work towards the same goal. And that's what we must do to tackle racism, because it's everywhere. Schools, it's in economy, it's in our social lives, it's in sports, it's in every area of our living where we're not. And so we have to do what we have to do to continue on the messaging. And I'm so grateful that earlier we spoke about the role of the church. Dr. Shabazz talked about education, and now we're talking about our value as a people. I read the holy text as just one continuous story. And Paul says in Ephesians that the blessed God and Father of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ has blessed us with all spiritual blessings in hiding places. He says he chose us in him before the foundation of the world. And when we go to the foundation of the world, we read in verse 27 where God says, let us make man in our image. And so when we begin with that as our viewpoint, we can minimize what others say about us. The wonderful poem that Dr. Davis just read to us highlights that. I don't have to necessarily receive the endorsement of others to feel I'm worthy. I'm worthy because God said so. And that ought to make a difference in our lives.
And that's such a wonderful segue to actually the final question for this afternoon. And the panel has really kind of spoken to it, but as we know, people will be tuning into this session. And I always like to kind of leave it with some type of tangible strategy that faith leaders and others who will watch this panel can tangibly use as they leave. So if each of the panelists could, as a call to action, what are 1 to 2 strategies that you would offer to faith leaders who are grappling with how to address this issue of the pandemic of racism or inequity or collaborations, or trying to encourage people in your network to have both the patience as well as the perseverance, as you all have alluded to? What are 1 to 2 strategies or a type of call to action that you can leave our viewers with?
Well, Sister Lee, I would make this plea to the entire world. Would you know that the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, created a trichotomy being, body, soul, and spirit? God created all human beings, a spirit that has a soul that lives in a body. Would you know that the message of God to the world is that you are not really the earthly tabernacle or the house in which you present? Some of you today have been created in white houses, some in black houses, neither of which represents the real intended you. The real you is the spirit inside of you. This is the message to the Church of Christ, or the Church of Christ to the world. If you could wrap your mind around the concept of who you really are, perhaps we can start the road to healing the ignorance and cancer of overt and subvert racism. Would you know that the Church of Christ stands ready in her respective cultures and her communities to collaborate with responsible, serious individuals who want to come together to bring healing to the many Black lives that are being murdered in the streets of America, and the many individuals who are people of non-color that have developed a heightened sensitivity to the wrongness of what is going on? Would you know that we stand ready to collaborate with individuals who will come with not a political agenda, but with a moral agenda to right some of the wrongs that has happened in our cultures and in our societies? This is the core message of the Church of Christ, that peace on earth, heaven after a while, has been offered to all human beings, irrespective of your skin color, of your culture, of your history, and of your background. And I say again, finally, no man will ever live atop this earth who will be smart enough to come up with a problem to which God does not have the answer.
Awesome.
And I would say we've got hundreds of elected officials within our own fellowship, judges, lawyers, civil rights activists. Get behind them and give them your support as much as you can. And do the same thing for our ministers, especially our young ministers who are trying to step outside the box and do some things differently, being criticized for it. To the degree to which you can agree that it's going according to God's will, it fulfills his purpose, it glorifies him, get behind them and give them some support, give them some love on that. It's hard because it has not been our tradition. So I think we can be supportive and then, of course, invest in our youth.
And allow me, Sister Lee, just to take this moment to thank Dr. Phyllis Davis for investing in all of us through the years. And I know I speak for all of her students without exception, that we love her dearly. And we're so grateful to her for opening up our eyes and bringing value to our lives. So not only get behind the elected officials that she has spoken of, get behind her. At Southwestern Christian College. Be an adverb to her work at the college. Don't just support her, strongly support her. I was formed and informed by Dr. Phyllis Davis, and I'm proud to say that. But she's carrying on the proud prophetic tradition of her great-great-grandfather, G.P. Bowser, the founder of the institution that provides deep education to inform other students and transform their lives, to bring them up to become critical thinkers and change agents. What Dr. Shabazz said is wonderful, along with Dr. Davis, but let's continue to support the other institution we have in our fellowship, which is Southwestern Christian College. Let's support the work of everyone involved, our president, Dr. E.D. Simster, our professors, and let's continue to provide that wonderful institution with all of the students it needs to work upon them so that we can cultivate that great prophetic spirit of Amos, Isaiah, John the Baptist, that not only speaks truth to power, but speaks truth about power.
Thank you, panel, so much. I mean, we have more than enough to chew on just with this discussion, but hopefully those who have engaged today will not just stop here with this discussion, but will continue on and really think critically about what we can do individually and in our roles within our respective churches, within our respective communities, because as has been addressed by all the panels, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon, and I just want to thank each of you for serving on this panel, as well as all others who participated in this discussion today. We will leave you now with just saying that we will stay prayerful, we will stay connected to God, and we want everyone to be safe and to be well.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Sister Lee. God bless. Thank you,
Dr.
Davis.
Thank you,
God
Sheri.
bless you. God bless you, brother. Good to see you all.
Yes, sir. God bless you.